I believe that the crowd has power to make change. And I want to give you a few examples of it. The former Prime Minister of Greece, George Papandreou, was speaking to us in the TED Global Conference in the summer of 2013 because everybody wanted to know, in a retrospective view, what had effectively happened, and what the experts and all the prime ministers were discussing when we were in the middle of this crisis that we now seem to be able to forget. And this is a little bit what he gave us.
Brussels, when we tried desperately again and again to find common solutions, I realized that not one of us had ever dealt with a similar crisis. But worse, we were trapped by our collective ignorance. We were led by our fears. And our fears led to a blind faith in the orthodoxy of austerity. Instead of reaching out to the common or the collective wisdom in our societies, investing in it to find more creative solutions, we reverted to political posturing. And then we were surprised when every ad hoc new measure didn't bring an end to the crisis. And of course, that made it very easy to look for a whipping boy for our collective European failure. And of course, that was Greece.
I think that this guy is very brave because he effectively stood up there to say, he said, the collective ignorance. We were trapped by our collective ignorance of the experts, as opposed to be reaching out to the collective wisdom of our societies. So in a nutshell, he was telling to a room of experts, stop being experts, stop being ignorant. And the reaction was quite surprising. As in opposition, you can see something in a totally different situation, such as the so-called Arab Spring, totally different type of situation, where when somebody, and excuse me for the lack of quality of the video, this was taken from YouTube, when a kid in the crowd was asked about
أنا جاي النهارده عشان أرفض إن مصر تكون عزبة حد أو ملك أي حد، وعشان أرفض إن الدستور يسيطر عليهم يا جماعة وفلسطين مهما كان.
مين علمك الكلام ده في الأزهر ولا أنت؟
لا أنا
عارفه منين؟
بسمع كلام من ناس كتير، وأنا عن نفسي ليا عقل ووعي يعني. بقرا الجرايد، بخش على النت. مبني على باطل فهو باطل، حتى لو الدستور حلو وتشكيل وحش يبقى يطلع وحش. ما انت ما تجيبليش 80 ماده مضاد وتجيب لي 20 ماده هيبوظوا البلد وتقول لي ده دستور.
شفت المسوده يا علي؟ قريتها فين على الانترنت؟
So, that kid, if you would have been able to create a bottom-up approach to this problem that was going on in Europe, and create a conversation between this kid and Papandreou and his other fellow experts, things would have been very different. Let me give you another example. In NASA right now, there's two programs. One, the NASA commissioned the company Boeing, they do jets, as you know, to come up with an algorithm to reduce the exposure of the sun of certain parts, in their stations when they circle around the Earth. Because effectively, when they are exposed to the light of the sun, they melt and they create huge costs, and replacement problems. So effectively, the company came up with a solution that was a very sophisticated algorithm for about $2.5 million. While they were doing that, Professor Karim Lakhani from Harvard, the business school, created what is called the NASA Tournament Lab, which is a crowdsourcing competition with a platform called Top Coder, and they launched this crowdsourcing competition. A citizen from China, 21 years old, this kid, came up with an algorithm between 55 to 75% more efficiency than the one produced by Boeing for $30,000. So that gives you another example, of that power of the crowd. And I was feeling that we were being left behind, because again, I was raised with Encyclopedia Britannica, created by a ton of experts, and providing us this fantastic knowledge. So I wonder, how many of you have consulted Encyclopedia Britannica over the past 30 days? Now let me ask you, how many of you have consulted Wikipedia over the last 30 days? Can you please raise your hands? Okay, that gives you an idea of the power of the crowd and the way we see it. Now, in real estate, what was going on in real estate? In 1933, President Roosevelt created the Securities Act. And the premise was to eliminate any interference to honest business. And they excluded the private offerings from the Securities Act. And within the private offerings, they included commercial real estate. Now, what happened 80 years after based on that premise? What happened to the crowd? And what happened to real estate, which is what we do? Put the crowd together with real estate. The crowd was secluded to investing in bonds, commodities, and stocks, with its volatilities and with the blessings of the public market. But they couldn't invest in commercial real estate. It just wasn't legal because it was part of the private offering, and open solicitation wasn't possible. Now, what happened to real estate? Real estate was the safest investment, and in the middle of the crisis between 2007 and 2008, all the large institutional investors and corporations entered into what is called the flight to quality. They put their money in treasuries, gold, and commercial real estate in 10 big metropolitan markets in the United States. Effectively, the prices in these markets dropped by 2.5%, which is 4 times less than the national average, while still cash flowing. So it was the safest asset. So the contradiction after 80 years was that in order to protect, with that fantastic premise from President Roosevelt, the public from fraud or interfering, or from any interference, to honest business, they effectively excluded the public from the safest asset there was. So that was what happened to the crowd, and that's what happened to real estate. Now, while this was going on, we started doing crowdfunding in Colombia, which in emerging markets, crowdfunding is very different. I'm sure you have heard, about the world record in crowdfunding, which is a massive skyscraper that we did down there. And we started crowdsourcing ideas as well to take the power of the crowd not only into the funding of the project, but also into the design of it. Because the top-to-bottom approach, effectively put us in a position where we didn't want to be experts at all. And we were coming up with projects such as Bogota Art District, where we believe, that the artist community, the contemporary artist community in Latin America is huge. And they have no means to really be exposed to art collectors or to galleries. So and there's no Soho like we have here in New York. So we buy houses with a crowd of investors, and we refurbish them, we fix them, and we create live-work spaces where these upcoming artists, live and work, and they pay us the rent in form of art that we take at a certain discount consistent with what the art galleries normally charge them, in a way of creating, this integration of things that wouldn't be possible in the traditional equity financing. So when we wanted to take this model back to the United States, thanks to the Jobs Act, to see how effectively that open solicitation clause was lifted to accredited investors and to non-accredited investors, we started to make projects viable, democratizing investments, such as this first hotel that we're doing downtown. It's a commercial asset in one of the best markets in the world that was part of that flight to safety and quality from the institutional investors that people eventually are going to be able to acquire for $10,000 a piece in a way of democratizing investments. Then we decided to take some of the crowdsourcing notions that we learned about in a project that we did in Colombia called ABH, Airport Business Hub, and we're creating the first urban and architecture and real estate platform to crowd design, which is different than design by committee because we effectively create a conversation between people from all over the world and our group of curators. You get people like Andre from Bali to participate, beyond his geographic limitations in the design of a project in New York with its benefits and its cons. You get people, like Paul as well, from a remote location to participate in stuff like this. So in general, we believe, because we're running out of time, that crowdfunding is the way to level up the playing field for everybody, to democratize not only investments, but also eventually through crowdsourcing, democratize the way we conceive things in a less arrogant approach than the traditional top to bottom that we have endured for too long. And I think that we all need to stop trying to be experts. We need to be curators of the true wisdom of the crowd. And that only happens thanks to technology and through social media and through the minds of people like yourselves that are changing everything, from my Encyclopedia Britannica to crises in the Arab world, and through crowdfunding as well in real estate. Thank you very much.